Conflict is one of the most common interactions that we have with other human beings, whether it's arguing who called the parking spot first or debating the format of a new sales proposal for your business. Conflict is everywhere. But what about in different cultures? What about in cultures with different collective and individual societies? Before we get to the differences in conflict styles, let's begin with a quick refresher on the differences between collectivistic and individualistic societies. We need to ask the question, does the individual's life belong to him or her, or does it belong to the group? Individualism is defined as a society in which the ties between individuals are loose, and everyone is expected to look after himself or herself and his or her immediate family. I like to view individualism as the idea that the individual's life belongs to him and that he has an inalienable right to live it as he sees fit, to act on his own judgment, to keep and use the product of his effort, and to pursue the values of his choosing. Remind you of any nation in particular? That's right, you guessed it. The land of the free and the home of the brave comes in as the most individualistic country in the world, scoring a 91 on the individualist score index, with Australia and Great Britain coming in at second and third respectively. Now what about collectivism? In class we define collectivism as societies where the interest of the group prevails over the interest of the individual, which surprisingly is actually most of the world. Simply put, collectivism is the idea that the individual's life belongs not to him but to the group or society in which he is merely a part of, and he must sacrifice his values and goals for the group's greater good. Any ideas on where the most collectivistic cultures are located? If you guessed Central America, you'd be correct. Central American countries continue to come in as the most collectivistic societies in the world, with Guatemala leading the pack, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Honduras following thereafter. Now it's important to note that all wealthier countries score higher on the individual index scale, while nearly all poorer countries tend to score lower. Ah yes, the infamous conflict styles charts. The chart that we've probably seen in numerous classes and learned about several different times. So instead of boring you with this, let's change it up a little bit. Ting Toomey refers to two different models for handling interpersonal conflict, the outcome-oriented model and the process-oriented model. So let's start with the outcome-oriented one. In individualistic cultures, the outcome-oriented model emphasizes the importance of asserting individual interests in the conflict situation and moving rapidly toward the phase of reaching tangible outcomes or goals. In a study conducted by Dr. Loon of UCLA, he compared American and Chinese conflict styles. Employing self-report data, he found that both cultures were more likely to pursue conflict with strangers than with friends, and the Chinese were more likely than Americans to sue a stranger, whereas Americans were more likely than the Chinese to sue a friend, which is messed up, I agree, but true. These findings support the idea that individualistic societies focus more on the results of the conflict rather than saving face and relationships. In collectivistic cultures, Ting Toomey says that the process-oriented model is the most common method of relieving conflict. This model emphasizes the importance of managing mutual or group-based interest in the conflict process before discussing tangible outcomes or goals. Another study conducted by Dr. Lee and Dr. Rogan of UC Santa Barbara found that South Koreans, of very collectivistic culture, varied their use of non-confrontational strategies based on the status of the other person, using avoiding and obliging strategies more as the power of the other person increased. Now these results changed a little bit when they focused on the Americans, as it usually does. In the same study, they also showed respondents from the United States did not alter their use of avoiding based on the power of the other party. In other words, the Americans did not care as much about saving face, rather solving the problem by any means necessary. I hate to do it, but we gotta come back to the dual concerns model that we've all grown to love. After going through several different journals looking for different models, I have come to the conclusion that the dual concern model is the best when comparing conflict in individual versus collectivistic societies. This model predicts that when an individual has high concern for one's own interests combined with a low concern for others' interests, the most confrontational model is used, also known as the dominating style, most commonly used in individualistic cultures. If concern for one's own interests is low and concern for the others is high, The dual concern model predicts that the person will use an obliging conflict style, which defined as a non-confrontational style that emphasizes preserving the relationship with the other person rather than pursuing an outcome that only meets the individual's needs. Wait, now hold on a second. All of the research presented this far has been concerning solely individualistic or collectivistic cultures and their own conflict styles pertaining to each other. This got me thinking, what happens when a member of an individualistic culture has a conflict with a member of a collectivistic culture? Lucky for me, I have experience with this type of conflict when I took a trip to Guatemala with my family. Back when I was in high school, my family and I took a mission trip to Guatemala City to build both a medical and dental office for an orphanage that would provide free health checkups and teeth cleanings for its residents. During this month-long trip, I had the opportunity to work alongside many Guatemalan residents, but also had to deal with several conflicts that arose out of those residents. Now, before I move on to the next slide, I have to ask you to ignore my hairstyle. I'm not quite sure what I was thinking because I was in high school. Guatemala is considered to be one of the most collectivistic societies in the world, as we learned earlier in the presentation. This meant that these workers and I had very different ways of handling conflict. They tended to use the obliging style, and I tended to use the dominating style. This led to me making most of the decisions which simply would not work for this type of project. We needed a variety of ideas and a variety of different ways to implement those ideas. After looking back on this experience now, I realized that we naturally adapted both of our conflict styles to make the process work, but it was much harder than it sounds. As we made the transition from coworkers to friends, I began to change the way I dealt with conflict and the idea of the group as the whole. We gradually started moving towards a happy medium in our conflict styles, which in other words would be the compromising technique right in the middle. This led to more constructive conflict, which allowed us to complete the project in a very efficient and timely fashion, which made both I and little Anna here very happy.